It's seconds out as Europe and America lock horns. It's twice as big versus twice as fast. You can't beat the simplicity of a 1930s Tiger Moth.
Whoa! Hey! Superb!
But I wouldn't want to fly to New York in one.
The aviation revolution was an incredible thing. Once designers got the bit between their teeth, so to speak, once they got their heavy metal airborne, developments proceeded at an incredible rate. Within 30 years of the development of the Tiger Moth, two teams of designers were at work developing the most unimaginable creation.
One team decided to build a plane twice as big as anything else in the sky, but the other team went for speed. They wanted to bring supersonic flight to the masses.
A succession of military aircraft had already exceeded Mach 2, that's twice the speed of sound, but they were highly dangerous and very often lethal to their crews. Who on earth would dream of putting 100 passengers in a civilian airliner, sipping champagne in air-conditioned comfort, where you could go to the potty and not even think about spilling your coffee?
Just who would be so crazy? Well, try the politicians of France and Britain. The two former superpowers would stop at nothing to get one over on the Americans, to be the first to send passengers through the sound barrier. It may have seemed bonkers, but what they built was an aviation legend. Slender, sexy, and faster than a bullet. Concorde. Flying at 1,300 miles per hour, it barely worked up a sweat. And if that's hard to believe today, imagine what people thought back in the 1950s when designers announced their plans. We didn't even have calculators back then. If they wanted to fly passengers at Mach 2, designers would have to overcome a series of enormous technological hurdles.
Concorde, of course, was going to be subject to temperatures and pressures and heating effects, which no passenger aircraft had ever been subjected to before. In fact, Concorde grew by 10 inches on every single flight and then shrank back again at the end when it got back on the ground, simply because of heat expansion. And nobody knew what this would do over time to the structure of the airplane.
Friction on the airframe would heat the body of the plane to a scorching 127 degrees centigrade.
That's hotter than any other passenger airplane. In fact, you could even fry your breakfast on it. That'll be done quite nicely in a couple of minutes. Whilst the Europeans were betting their shirts on everybody travelling around at twice the speed of sound, for Boeing, their vision of the future was very different. Their vision was big.
Americans had never been shy about unleashing huge aircraft into the skies. Unfortunately, planes like the Spruce Goose never really took off. By the 1960s, the success of Boeing's early jets had convinced them that the time was right to bring out their specially extended tape measures. The 747, the jumbo jet, was born. It would be twice the size of anything else in the skies, a quantum leap in aviation. Boeing were betting on the jumbo being a winner with the airlines. More space meant they could carry more passengers, 400 of them, and, almost as importantly, more freight. Well, that was the theory. The reality almost led them to bankruptcy. The 747 was a huge gamble for Boeing. In fact, during production, the company went $460 million in debt. Somebody put up a billboard outside the production plant. It read, "Will the last person to leave Seattle please turn out the lights?" Back in Europe, with the unlimited supply of two nations' treasuries, money was no obstacle. But working out how to get their new plane through the sound barrier was. No matter how much power you've got, an aeroplane's speed is limited by its shape. The real headache for Concorde designers was that the things that stop you flying super fast are what keep you in the air: your wings. The designers looked to the military. To slip through the sound barrier, fighter jets were using streamlined, wafer-thin delta wings. Perfect for nimble military planes, but would they work for a large commercial airliner? This is one of 4 prototypes built to find out whether or not supersonic passenger travel could become a reality. And what you see before you is the designer's conundrum. A delta wing which performed beautifully at Mach 2, but which unfortunately has lousy lift characteristics at slow speed. Designers would need to make their delta wing act like a normal wing. And how do they work? Well, pay attention, because here comes the clever bit. Wings all work on air pressure, all of them. The air, as it hits the leading edge of the wing, splits into 2. One goes over the top, one bit goes underneath the bottom. If you notice, the bottom is flat, the top is curved. But a very clever guy discovered that both parcels of air arrive at the back of the wing at the same time. Therefore, this one, which has to travel further, it must go faster. If it goes faster, the molecules all get spread out. That means less pressure on the top, means more pressure on the bottom relatively, and bingo, the aeroplane lifts into the sky, as long as you've got enough speed. So why not stick a massive jet on a tiger moth and go supersonic that way? Well, the lift characteristics of the tiger moth with 4 wings worked very well at slow speeds like this. But the drag characteristics were appalling. The thing is a flying brick. And bricks don't go supersonic. So if a traditional high-lift wing creates too much drag, how did Concorde designers get slow speed lift from their slippery, thin, supersonic delta wing? The answer was in the wind tunnel. After 5,000 hours of testing, they crafted a carefully curved, drooping wing, which caused the air to rapidly spiral across the top. These vortices created the magical reduction of pressure at slow speed and high angles of attack that was needed to get Concorde into the air. Phew, that was the easy bit. Now all they needed were the power plants. If I was an air molecule, I'm about to have a very interesting life because I'm about to go into the front end of a Concorde jet engine. The irony is, though, that in order to get supersonic thrust out of the back of the engine likes subsonic airflow. It likes a nice, smooth passage of air all the way through it. Unfortunately, if it gets supersonic air going in the front, it has the equivalent of engine indigestion. It's called surge, and it can destroy a jet engine in seconds. To solve this problem, and to get the correct kind of performance out of the engines, the aerodynamicists and the designers came up with what can only be described as a supersonic cat flap. Essentially, when the aeroplane started to go supersonic, then huge quantities of air came in that the engine couldn't cope with, so down comes the cat flap. It was actually called a ramp. So the ramp comes down into the airflow, which slows it down, and as a byproduct, also does some of the engine's work for it, because as the air whacks into the ramp, it's also compressed, which is one of the jobs of the engines in the first place. So they extracted even more efficiency out of an already very efficient engine. Concorde's maiden flight in 1969 was a landmark. After 14 years of planning, France and Britain had built the impossible, a supersonic passenger aircraft. This is one of aviation's sacred sites, the flight deck of a Mach 2.2 Concorde. If I was to make a comparison with rock and roll, I would say that everything on this aeroplane goes to 11, just like the apocryphal amplifier in Spinal Tap. But if you want to see something that really is extraordinary, and you won't find it on any other civilian aeroplane, check out the Mach meter. It goes to Mach 2 and beyond. Interesting fact. As long as Concorde was in service, the RAF never had a single aeroplane that could catch it. In the 1960s, Europe and America were competing to build the jet plane of the future. Britain and France were convinced speed was essential. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Boeing had decided it was time to build the 747. The Boeing 747 was going to be the world's biggest airliner, and in order to build it, they had to build the world's biggest building, this one. And no, that's not a toy truck. The building is massive. You could fit 75 football pitches in here. The 747 project would take 50,000 workers, over 75,000 engineering drawings, and 6 million individual parts. A logistical nightmare. And Boeing planned to get the plane flying in just 3 years. Joe Sutter is the man who made it all happen, the chief designer, the daddy of the 747. He told me just how tough a job it was.
It really was unknown territory. Nobody knew how to build a 350 to 400 passenger airplane. Well, there were a lot of skeptics. My wife, Nancy, she'd meet her friends, and the question was, does your husband know what he's doing? Is he crazy designing that big airplane? The major fight in designing the 747, meet all the requirements, but keep the weight under control. Overweight will kill an airplane. This investment was so big, we were spending Boeing money like it was going out of style. And you get a program like that into trouble, and the recovery is, you know, it's just suicide.
When the 747 rolled out to meet the crowds, no one was prepared for what they saw. They expected big, but this thing was a colossus. It weighed in at nearly 200 tons. That's about the same as 30 buses, and that's without fuel or passengers. The doommongers thought pilots would never manage to control the beast. Would the jumbo become $1 billion white elephant? Boeing test pilot Jack Waddell was the first to discover if Joe Sutter and his team had got their sums right. In February 1969, just 2 months behind schedule, he became the first pilot to lift this Leviathan off the ground. And boy, what a brown trousers moment that must have been. Here at Manston Airport in Kent, I'm going to see how a group of 747 trainees cope with the same challenge today.
We have 28 tons worth of landing gear.
They're going to practice the most difficult part of flying this plane, landing it.
Today when you're flying, you'll have the throttles almost closed, and it will be racing along like a wild horse.
I want one.
Hi, Bruce.
Sorry, I'm overdressed. Captain Alan Nicholson is in charge of the training. He's clocked up over 8,000 hours in the 747 and knows exactly what the learner pilots need to look out for.
Gently with the power, otherwise it might take you by surprise. Now you can hear the noise, can't you? 80 knots. Rotate, gentle rotate.
no passengers on board, we were hurtling. So, John, it's about to be your turn to go and land this. What's the biggest aeroplane that you've flown? What aeroplanes have you flown?
I've been flying the Metroliner, and the Learjet 35 is the most powerful airplane. But
right.
the Learjet weighs about 8,000 kilos. This weighed about, fully loaded, 370 tons.
Right, so it's a wee bit bigger.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you a bit nervous?
Yeah, very.
Because
But I'm excited also. I've been waiting for this my whole, I don't know, life.
The 747's a massive step up from John's usual plane. This cockpit carries as many people as his Learjet. I have every confidence in you.
That's good.
I'm not nervous at all.
Sure?
Yeah.
Because I am.
Well, here we go. This is John's first landing in a 747. He's doing a really great job.
500. Bring the nose up. That's it. That's looking good. A little bit more power.
400.
A tiny bit slow.
300.
This is the toughest bit for John. The cockpit is so high up and the landing gear so far back, it would be easy to think you've still got 100 feet to go when you suddenly bury the wheels into the runway.
Start bringing the nose up
50.
now.
40.
Shut the throttles. Just hold the nose up
20.
there. Nose up, nose up, nose up, nose
10.
up. That's it. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think he did rather well. After the briefest of stays on terra firma, John takes the plane back up for the next pilot.
Rotates. Very nice.
I think I owe John a beer for that. John, that was absolutely cracking. How was that?
Probably the best thing I've done in my whole life.
This one, you know, it seems to be pretty maneuverable the way you're chucking it around on, you know, the base.
Yeah.
You know.
It actually handles like a, almost like a small Cessna, but,
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
Very good. Even though John's never flown a plane of this size, he pulled off a perfect landing. Boeing really did prove the skeptics wrong. The Jumbo holds the world record for the most number of people ever carried. 1,200 people on an individual flight from Addis Ababa to Tel Aviv. The Jumbo is so big that when it's pressurized, it carries 1 ton of air inside it. You could fit the distance of the Wright brothers' first flight inside the economy section of a Boeing 747. And it's so wide, you could fit 3 Concorde fuselages inside this fuselage. The Jumbo entered service 5 years before Concorde. By the time Europe's supersonic dream had finished testing and was ready for passengers, the world had changed. A massive increase in oil prices meant the only profitable way to run an airline was by getting bums on seats, which gave the Jumbo a huge advantage. Well, on a Concorde, all the passengers would fit just in that bit. But on the 747, it just goes on and on and on, and that's without the upstairs. Having initially thought they couldn't afford not to buy Concorde, in 1973, orders for more than 50 aircraft from 16 airlines were cancelled. The plane, conceived by politicians, would fly only for the state airlines of the governments that built it, Britain and France. Gone too was the notion of mass passenger transit. Tickets would sell at first-class prices, plus another 20% on top. Concorde became the exclusive plaything of the rich and the famous. For 34 years, Concorde was faster than any other passenger plane in the sky. But in 2003, economics finally overtook it. And these fuel gauges tell a story. 30 tons per hour at takeoff thrust. That's 35,000 litres per engine, and there's 4 of them. Concorde was 5 times less fuel efficient than the Jumbo. It could only make money when it was full of celebrities paying £6,000 for a return ticket. After the Paris crash and 9/11, passenger numbers dwindled. Concorde became a strain on its cash-strapped airlines, and they wheeled the planes off to museums. By contrast, the 747 has carried over 3.5 billion passengers. That's more than half the population of the world. But you know what? Ask any one of them which plane they'd rather fly, and I bet, like me, they'd say Concorde. I do love this aeroplane, but I have an apology to make to her, because I flew in a Concorde in the mid-80s when hair was big and sense was in short supply. And I so looked forward to it, but I was so drunk when I got on it that I fell asleep and missed the entire experience. I made up for it because I did subsequently come and fly again in the Concorde, and I looked out of the window and I saw the curvature of the Earth, and I flew at Mach 2, and it was an unforgettable experience. Once they'd proved that big was beautiful, no control whatsoever over the airplane. The next frontier of flight was efficiency and control. This is the daftest thing I've done in an airplane for years. Fall back stick. Blimey.